good evening, everyone. I will call this Tigard-Tualatin School District Budget Committee meeting to order at 6:31 p.m. First, Dr. Reconstitute, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are none, Chair.
All right, with that, we will move first to, we need an approval. So now I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we'll move to a choral vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All right, all opposed say nay. Motion carries, and I will note for the record that Director Zershmead, Director Urban, and Director Lynn are joining via Zoom this evening, and then there's a group of us in person as well. Okay, so with that, we will move to item number 3 on the agenda, election of officers for the Budget Committee meeting. Are there any nominations for the presiding officer? Chair. You got to nominate yourself? I think that's it. I think it's self-nomination acceptable. If not, I nominate Corey Morgan for chair.
I accept the nomination.
Okay. Corey Morgan has been nominated and accepts the nomination. Are there any other nominations? All right, hearing none, I will call for a roll call vote on this one. So be listening for your name if you're able to vote. This is a roll call vote. Saying aye signals that you vote yes for Corey Morgan. No means you vote no. Corey, you're first.
Aye.
Jimmy Brown. Jessica Pels. Megan Madlam. Director Zershmead.
Aye.
Director Urban.
Aye.
Aye.
Vice Chairman votes aye. And I think Director James is later. And I don't see Octavio. So that's everybody, I believe. Okay, so Corey, you have unanimous.
Dan, I didn't vote.
Oh, I apologize, Vice Chair Lynn. I thought I heard you say aye. Please cast your vote now.
Aye. I'm not sure who that was. It wasn't me.
Perfect. Thank you. Oh, that was David. Perfect. Okay, great. Then I will add that.
Did you guys hear me? Yes.
Yes, we did. In fact, I thought you were Vice Chair Lynn. So that's my fault. And I, of course, vote aye. So at this point, Corey Morgan, you've been elected chair. I will pass the gavel to you and let you take us from here. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Chair Bowman. It is now time for nominations for Vice Presiding Officer. Are there any nominations?
I will nominate Jimmy Brown for the position.
Jimmy Brown has been nominated to accept Jimmy. Are there any other nominations? All right, nominations closed. I'm gonna do a roll call vote. Jimmy, you're first up. Jessica Peltz.
Aye.
Megan Madlam. Octavio is still not with us. Director Bowman.
Aye.
Director Zershmead.
Aye.
Director Urban.
Aye.
Vice Chair Lynn.
Aye.
Director Hymas is still not with us. Director Hymas.
Aye.
Aye.
And I am an aye. Thank you. Welcome, Jimmy. Proceedings. All right, next agenda item is for our CFO, David Moore, to present the budget message.
Good evening, Presiding Officer Morgan and members of the Budget Committee. It's my pleasure this evening to present the 22-23 budget message, and want to take this time to go over some of the highlights that are shared in the budget message inside the budget document. So just for an overview, we always have uncertainty when we're talking about budget. So I'm going to share some points about uncertainty in the short future, or the short term, and uncertainty in the long term. And then state funding is the basis of our most of our resources within the budget. So we'll give an overview with that, and then we have some pockets of one-time resources I want to give you an update on. And then our capacity in the budget this year is pretty marginal when it comes to new strategic investments, but we do have a small level of investment using our other resources, including the student investment account and the ESSER federal relief dollars. And then finally, the board has their reserve or fund balance policy. So I want to give an update on that and how that's impacted by this budget, and talk about revenue shortfall and the outlook going forward. So that's an overview of what we're going to be talking about in this presentation. So I mentioned uncertainty both in the short term and the long term. We're moving into the second year of a biennium. Of course, the state budget's on a 2-year basis. The district has to budget on a 1-year basis. A year ago, the legislature adopted a state school fund of $9.3 billion. So we're expecting to receive our share of that on a 51% basis. In the current year, we received 49% of our share. Next year will be 51%. That's by design. It is intended to cover increase in costs. So that's a 4% increase in revenue when it comes to state revenue. And also on the short term, back in prior to the pandemic in 2019-20, since then, through comprehensive distance learning and other modes of learning, we lost about 750 students for various reasons. And so that's about 6% for us. And a year ago for the current budget, we actually budgeted for those kids to come back, and few, if any, came back this year. So, however, with the 22-23 proposed budget, we're forecasting based on our demographers forecast that 238 students will come back into the system. So our revenue is based on that increased enrollment and average daily membership weighted, which consists of enrollment in addition to additional weights received for special populations. The other thing of note is that this is a longer term issue. In the current year, the statewide average daily membership weighted for ADMW is down about 25,000. It fell under the 700,000 mark. And so that's about a 3.5% decline since 2019-20. So some concern there in the longer term is how does this impact future biennia state school fund allocations? And some of the word we're getting from state legislators is that if overall statewide AD&MW is down, why do you need more money next biennium? So we're going to show that forecasted outlook towards the end of this presentation, but will make us stop and think about what we're estimating going forward. Of course, we'll know more probably a year from now when the 23 legislature convenes and is developing and approving the budget for the 23-25 biennium. The other piece of news, and this isn't actually in the budget message, but it's new news from the state economist last week. They gave their quarterly update. It's called the June forecast, even though it happens in May. The one thing that I latched onto is kind of how they concluded the presentation. And they said, they gave a hint of a recession. And that's the first time in any recent quarter that they've addressed that or mentioned that following the current inflationary period. So that could mean a loss of jobs and in effect, loss of state revenue in the longer term. So another thing to keep our eye on, and it could impact future state school fund allocations and the upcoming biennium. I'm going to stop there and take a breath and see if there's any questions so far.
I have a question. I have a couple questions actually. So first, just some clarifying questions. So the state sets a state school fund amount for a biennium, but the number of students that are being calculated as part of the state school fund distributions varies throughout those 2 years. We saw a dip, but the entire state saw a dip. So is it calculated? So the calculation is made based annually.
Correct.
So, but just making sure I understand this correct, because the number of students statewide dropped, we are not losing as much money as we would have lost because of our drop, because it's spread out across 197 districts.
Correct. Yeah. So for instance, at the beginning of this year, when we had our fall enrollment numbers, just a first shot at it, we thought we were going to lose about $4.5 million. And they gave districts an opportunity in the fall to update their enrollment numbers based on the actual fall enrollment. Maybe 30% of the districts took advantage of that opportunity. So they didn't really do any. I think they did do an update to the state school fund calculation, but where it really impacted things statewide is with the second quarter ADM collection. Every district has to report that. Those numbers were down, just like I shared earlier, and so that decreases the denominator for an amount for ADMW calculation. So when all things are said and done, we're about $2 million down in the current year.
That is what I was.
Yeah.
That's what I thought, but I'm glad you clarified.
Yeah.
So second question is, talked about 4951, our share of the state $9.3 billion state school fund, but we've seen inflation that's significantly higher than that rate. How has that factored in the, we get the 4951 from the state in that.
Yeah.
How has that impacted TTSD?
Yeah, so it will impact us going forward. In addition to softening the blow of the loss of revenue due to what we just talked about with the statewide calculation, we've also had savings in the current year related to cost. We, one area we continue to see savings on is employees making smart decisions when it comes to insurance selections. And so on average, we save about $2 million a year compared to how we budgeted. And over the years, we've refined that budget methodology. It's one of those fine balance things, though. You don't want to go too far one direction and be over budget. So we're pretty conservative on that budget estimate. We also have positions that we have open that we can't hire. There's probably 15 to 20 positions so that's another savings. But we can't assume that we're not going to hire those positions in the future. So we have to budget going forward. And so, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that doesn't. So yes, we felt inflation. We anticipate we'll do it more forward, but the savings, other areas of the budget has helped us.
And the other thing related to inflation currently we have a contract in place at the end of June. Where it may impact us is when we're currently bargaining new contracts effective July 1, and how those end up, any inflationary impact could be seen in the future, if that makes sense.
Director Martin.
Thank you. I have a couple questions on enrollment forecast. So with the enrollment drop of the 750 students across the district, was it dispersed among all grades, or was it geared targeted more towards middle school or high school or elementary? And
It was mostly targeted towards elementary. I think I don't remember the exact distribution, but there was less impact in secondary grades. And yeah, so that was part of the methodology of guessing that 200 or so students might come back, because maybe there were some cases where parents held out their kindergartners. Kids were going to online charter schools outside our district, homeschooling, various reasons that we tried to data mine what the reasons were, but we didn't get to finite numbers.
my next question.
Paul, I just got a text that people can't hear. So if you could talk real close to the mic.
Okay. Oh, you can. Well, my next question is about the actual forecasting. I'm sure we do that on a semi-regular basis. And so I was wondering what the horizon year is and if it takes into account land use within like urban growth boundary outside of the city.
Yeah, so it's been tricky during the pandemic. Normally the base year, the horizon year is the fall enrollment, because we do the demand for study in the fall. And then the report gets issued every January. And then
What's the time span?
10 years.
10 years.
So, and then what was the second part of your question?
Oh, does it take into account future land use areas, future growth areas?
Yeah,
such
so
as
we get
within-
updates from all the jurisdictions on developments, and we save those up, send them to the demographer each fall. And he also has his own communication line with the building departments of the jurisdictions within our districts. Utilize that information also.
Thank you.
Yep. Ready to move forward? Good questions. So I mentioned the state school fund of $9.3 billion. So in our budget for 22-23, that results in our portion is $138.7 million. So that's the largest revenue source, of course, in our general fund. So the multipliers are extended ADMW of 13,964. So that number historically, prior to the pandemic, has always been above 14,000. So this is likely a new trend, at least for the time being. And then the amount per ADMW of 9,935. So that number, has ballooned a little bit in this year because of the concept we were talking about before, where there's less kids statewide, less ADMW statewide. So that number, I think, was closer to 93, maybe current year. And if you're interested in learning more about the state school fund formula, you want to look at pages 30 and 31 of the document. That has the piece that the first page describes the elements of the funding formula, including local property taxes, transportation. We're reimbursed 70 cents on the dollar for homeschool transportation. And then we get a small bump due to the experience level of our teachers. And so that has all the numbers that generate the 138 million. The second page is the elements of it, the average daily membership weighted. So our regular ADM or average daily membership, additional weight for the special education students, additional half weight for English language students, and a quarter for poverty, pregnant and parenting with additional weight. So that describes all of those elements that result in 13,964. And this year, normally the extended portion of that means you compare this year with the immediate preceding year. Our number is of this year, so we're using this year's number. Where last year we had nosedived, so we got to use the 1920 number.
And that means next year's number will be no lower than this year's.
Yes. I'm hoping it's 200 higher. So I mentioned other resources also. So most people are familiar with the student investment account. So was a result of 2019 legislation, the Student Success Act, which is funded by the corporate activity tax, which on a targeted basis of $2 billion per biennium, or for the corporate activity or the student investment account portion of that, it's 50%, $1 billion in the biennium. And the detailed pages for the SIA fund budget are on pages 96 and 97 of the document. This includes FTE of 82.44, and there's a summary of that FTE on page 21 of the budget message. And so this is a sustainable resource. We can depend on this as long as the CAT tax is in place, just like our general fund, state school fund is a sustainable resource. We'll talk about some non-sustainable resources too here in a minute. Also, we have as an additional sustainable resource, the high school success funds. This is part of 2017 legislation. Estimate for next year is 3.3 million. The detail for the budget is on pages 100 and 101. And these are funds that are designated at the high school level for everything from dropout prevention to career and technical education to college and career. And I think that's the three of them. So this resource is paid dividends at the high school level. We can use, I believe, up to 15% of that for 8th grade too. So the kids that are transitioning to high school the following year. So we also have one-time resources that are disposal currently. We have the ESSER funds, or the basically the COVID relief funds at the federal level. We received 3 iterations of these. The ESSER 1 was pretty much fully expended in 2021. and we used, that was a much smaller number, just under $1.5 million. And we used that to get our buildings ready for kids to come back and get in-person instruction. And then some related technology, but everything from cleaning supplies and equipment to masks to everything that we had on hand for students and staff as they came back into the building last fall. But ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 are more focused on getting students back up to speed on the learning they lost as they were at home or maybe not going to school. And those are the ESSER $2 are available through September 30th of 23. The ESSER $3 is September 30th of 24. So those dollars, they'll sunset at that point. So whatever use we put, whatever needs we put those dollars to use for, we'll have to prioritize and figure out which ones we retain in the budget or we do without. So the combined amount that we have budgeted in 22-23 is about $9 million between the two of them. And those are everything from additional positions, some one-time uses, but some of the positions that we have planned for those are, we added the health room attendants, which are classified positions to help at each of the buildings for all the healthcare needs, because we don't have a nurse in every building in our district, as an example. We had plans to use the funds next year and the following year to extend the calendar for employees to account for some planning and collaboration days. But that's something we have to do through the bargaining, agree to through the bargaining process. So there's still some uncertainty with that. But we're doing our best to put those dollars to good use. There's a little bit of angst at the state level that school districts aren't spending those dollars down soon enough. But I think most districts are trying to be planful because there's going to be a cliff at the end of next year and the following year because those dollars go away going forward. Other one-time resources we're getting, last year we got the summer learning money and childcare, and this year $100 million was allocated for that by the state legislature. We're expecting to receive just under $1.5 million for K-8 enrichment programs, summer program, and then another $726,000 for the 9-12 academic support program. The unfortunate thing is there's no specific dollars allocated for childcare this year. That's not to say we can't use some of those K-8 enrichment dollars for that to help subsidize, provide subsidies to parents and families for childcare. That's how they were used a year ago. Last year's amount just for childcare was $90,000 though, so we're missing that amount for this summer. Again, the programs require a 25% match by the district, so we'll identify other resources that will support the program also. We also need to figure out a way to pay for meals for this program because the waivers that have been in place the last couple of years provide free meals for all kids are going away June 30th. So we're trying to brainstorm on what the best resource is to fill in that gap. And these summer dollars are available through September of 22 this year. And plans are underway for the curriculum and the program by the teaching and learning department. So we also always like to address the district priorities, setting the stage for resource allocation in our budget. And of course, we have our current strategic plan, which we're finishing up this year. 5-year plan and the related strategic financial plan. And of course, with a commitment to equity in all students. And also the purpose of the strategic financial plan is to make sure we're aligning the use of resources with district goals and intended outcomes. We also added to support the current strategic plan a year ago. I guess it's been 2 years, hasn't it now? I've lost track after everything that's happened the last few years, but we added the district's priorities framework to focus on social emotional learning, culturally responsive teaching and learning, and human capital. And then we were so bored that, or the board was so bored that we decided we needed a new strategic plan effective this fall. So that process is underway, or has been underway, and we're looking forward to where that, I know the board's looking forward to where that ends up when they're presented the plan for adoption in the fall and implementation. So I briefly mentioned the budget investments before. This is on page 24, this little summary here of the budget message. And so we basically identified capacity of about $1 million in the SIA fund additionally for next year to add these investments that are listed here. I haven't been able to figure out the math at the state level, but I think I mentioned this last year of the budget committee too, but the target, like I said, for the corporate activity tax was $2 billion plus, for the biennium. And we're on target to reach or exceed that level. The tricky thing is when the legislature balanced the budget in 21, they allocated over $700,000 out of the corporate activity tax to get to the $9.3 billion level. So even though they say we're full funded for the SIA, we're not full funded for the SIA. So our amount that they gave us this amount maybe even a year ago. I'm hoping they give us a new estimate, but I'm not counting on it. Our amount for next year is 9.6 billion. It's 9.2 this year. But when the Student Success Act was being promoted and voted on, it was promised that we would get $10 million. Well, we're still short of that. We have a budget of 10.2 million for next year. But we're also expecting carryover funds. And so we're allowed to request carryover through September. So either way will be covered, whether they give us a higher allocation or we have that carryover to fill the gap between 9.6 or 10.2. But as far as the investments, our cabinet proposed these initially and worked collaboratively and was very planful on coming up with the priorities that were still in need. Jessica?
I was just wondering if you could talk about why we would use ESSER funds that are more than one time and they go away for these FTE instead of, I don't know,
Yeah,
could we use
it's-
ESSER for capital projects and switch that or something?
Yeah,
A long-term investment?
We don't have a lot of capital projects in our general fund. Most of we have a current bond, so we don't have a lot of capital project expenditures in our general fund. And it's a great question. And I was trying to set that message earlier where we're saying we're going to have a cliff. After these dollars go away and have to make maybe some hard decisions. But I'm confident enough in our smart school spending program, which is all part of the strategic financial plan where we make intentional and conscious decisions to align our resources and use of those resources with what our goals are as a district. We may decide that once we get done and we measure any outcomes with the use of these dollars, but it wasn't the right use. So we'll go through that exercise, prioritization, and determine, you know, what needs to stay and what needs to go. Jimmy.
Thank you. Along that same line, you know, in the time that I've been here, I've been really impressed with the district's connection to having very open and transparent processes as it relates to developing budgets and strategic plans. So as we look at the demise of the one-time funding and federal resources, I would ask that the board maintain its commitment to a robust, community-oriented process to determine the type of programs that would remain when we get to the cliff.
All good comments. Just to quickly summarize, there was, with the initial proposals, there was prioritization put on English learners, staffing, teachers in that area. A need for additional support at the administrative level, at the middle school level. We aren't really aligned currently on the number of staff we have at the middle school level, you know, the administration level compared to high school and elementary. Social workers we're seeing as a big need. We have one indicated here as a new position, but we already have allocated one FTE out of SIA. Currently, I think the position's already been hired, and then that was in the current SIA budget. And then we have another FTE in the ESSER that is being repurposed to a social worker position. So we're hoping to have 3 new social workers going into next year. And then instructional coaches, that's our professional learning model to have coaches work with classroom teachers to improve instruction. And then we have a new health curriculum that we need to make sure we have the right teachers on the bus to teach. And so there's a placeholder for that. And then we want to make sure we're keeping our buildings safe and healthy. And we have a challenge with keeping hiring and retaining custodians. So we spent a lot of time as a cabinet discussing this concept of getting adequate number of custodians in our building so that the current ones aren't feeling overburdened and overworked, and morale is kept up, because it's been a challenge to hire and retain in that area. Megan?
For the middle school, the health license staffing, will those be just medical health, or will that be also?
It's to teach the new health curriculum, so I can't speak to the details of that, but maybe Dr. Sue can.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, these are licensed teachers who have an endorsement in health. And so they are, you know, specifically trained in this curriculum. Are the thinking here, and I also want to address, Jimmy, your comment relative to transparency. The priorities that you see here came as part of a community process where David ably leads investments for sale and uses a technique where people have, in theory, $100, you know, based on the cost of the investments, and people list out then their priorities. And it was the same thing that we did with our administrators and with the other groups as well. So this is a compilation of all of those groups' input relative to what the priorities should be. So relative to the health, the thinking there is that given the challenges that we are seeing with students coming back into our system after a full year of being online, in many cases, highly dysregulated. And so a tiered system, what we call a multi-tiered system, level 1, level 2, and level 3. Health curriculum and having people who can teach it specifically because they're specifically trained to provide that extra support to our counselors and our social workers and the other mental health workers that we have, with the goal of keeping students in that tier 1 and not requiring tier 2 or tier 3 services.
Thank you, Dr. Sue. Any other questions on the investments or the process? I'm glad she mentioned the community process because I was about ready to leave that out. No, it was perfect.
David, excuse me, just one thing. The 25% match by district, that was in the prior slide.
Summer learning program.
Yeah.
Requires a 25% match by district. So in that match, are those general fund that we're talking about? We can't, for certain types of programs, can we match using, for example, one-time only federal funds?
Yeah, we can use any resource that supports the funding program in addition to these resources. So an example would be SIA. There's some of the programs, I don't think we have it coming to this year, but for we had student services grants that we got last year that supported the summer program for the students on IEPs. We got to include that as part of our match. So it could be a number of resources. It just needs to add up to 25% of the total cost.
So then as I look at the no specific dollars allocated for childcare, does not necessarily mean that there's no childcare servicing. It's just that we haven't yet identified the resources for that.
We'll have the childcare services. It's just a matter of how the childcare providers get paid. Is it going to be the parents that have to pay, or do we have the other piece that I didn't say because it's not our resource, but it's a good response to your question. There's $50 million actually allocated by the legislature for programs, but the $50 million goes to community partners. So if we have like a YMCA or something like that normally provides childcare services for us, they could technically apply for the dollars directly from the state and provide their own subsidies.
Thank you.
So I mentioned reserves briefly at the beginning. The board has board policy BBDB, which is means that there's a minimum expected reserves of 12% of the district's operating revenue in the general fund. And that 12% is broken down by 2% for operating contingency. So that means we have a line item called contingency in our budget, which actually could be spent without or a supplemental budget or reconvening this body. We just would have to have board action to move that to appropriations to utilize it. Typically, we don't utilize it. It's there if we need it, if an emergency comes up or we don't have something budgeted. And then 5% for unappropriated ending fund balance and another 5% for sustainable reserve. Excuse me. So our current budget, or our current proposed budget, has $159.3 million in operating revenue. So the 12% of that is about $19 million. And we have another $2 million set aside, and we've been carrying this forward for the opening of the Art Rec Elementary. And this is designated to cover any costs that we don't currently have in the budget from an operating standpoint, whether it's to staff the office, whether it's a counselor or principal, office staff, utilities for the building, any supplies for the building. So that's what that $2 million is intended to go towards when that school opens in the fall of 23. So that $2 million becomes a budgeted appropriation in the 23-24 budget. And will come out of the reserve category. So we have the total reserves of 21.1 million. I want to point out in the current proposed budget, we're showing drawdown of those reserves, kind of like our savings account, of course, and we're using 7.5 million of those reserves to balance the budget. This is all summarized on page 25 in the message. So we're starting the year with, or we're expecting to end this year with about $28.5 million in fund balance. That'll be our beginning fund balance next year. We draw down 7.5, we'll end up with 21.5.
Question on this. So I'm just trying to think through. So you mentioned at the top that the state economist has hinted that there might be signs of a recession. So in the past, when we have drawn down on reserves, it mentions, I think 2009, we drew it down. So the board would adopt a new policy DBD that basically sets a lower threshold, a lower required reserves.
Yeah, so when I first came here in 2012, we had drawn down the reserves to about $4 million, or around 3%. And so it wasn't the best welcoming when I came in the door, but
There was only 3% in reserves.
yeah, I'm guesstimating based on what I'm trying to remember what the revenue was, but it was probably 3 to 5%. So each from there on, before when we brought the budget to the board for adoption each June, we had to have a separate resolution where the board passed an exception to board policy DVD. And I know Dr. Sue doesn't want to have to ask you to do that.
But
Any,
so even drawing down the 7.5 million keeps us at our current board.
yeah. And we've been, it just coincidentally, it ended up this year in this budget where it was right near the amount we needed. You know, we didn't have to reduce. We didn't have additional dollars to invest. It was just right where we needed to be. And we'll talk about here in a minute, we'll talk about longer term, you know, the outlook. Tristan, you have a question?
Well, I was just going to have you explain a little bit, just sort of for the record, why the 12%, how that's not sort of an arbitrary number that was sort of drawn out of a hat, like that's the number that we're going to go with, but really why that's important sort of when you're looking at other, you know, similar districts or groups that have these reserves, kind of how that aligns with that, just so everyone listening is sort of clear about that number.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder, Director Urban. So, and if this isn't where you want me to go, just let me know. But there's some best practices for local governments, like a school district like ours, and the program that we adhere to through GFOA, or Government Finance Officers Association, each year we submit our audited financial statements for a special award, and the district has received that award like 33 straight years. And so we rely on their expertise when it comes to any government industry insights when it comes to finance. And so their recommended amount for reserves is 2 months worth of operating expenditures. So when you think of 2 months worth, that's about a sixth of the year. So that number is like a 16% number. So our 12% number isn't even at the industry standard. And that's our target, of course. A lot of times we end up closer to the 15 or 16%. At the end of last year, with the dollars we saved during the pandemic, our reserves went up because we didn't incur some cost during the pandemic. During comprehensive distance learning, we weren't transporting kids, so we weren't paying our contractor. We didn't have subs in our buildings for the most part, so we weren't paying the subcontractors. So we built up that fund balance a year ago, or at the end of last June, almost $34.5 million, which is closer to 20 to 22% reserve level. Director Zerschmied?
Yeah, so I just wanted to add, we started that reserve, I believe, 2012, no, excuse me, 2002, or 2004. And at the time, it took us several years to build it up. We've had it up to full strength a couple of times, and in recessions, we have spent it down to almost nothing on 2 separate occasions, and then gone and built it back up again. The second point I want to make is other school districts have larger reserves as a percentage of their annual budget. So ours is actually right in the middle and a little on the modest side, to be honest, certainly not extravagant.
Any other comments or questions about reserves before I move on? The other thing I'll add here is I came from a district where in the middle of the Great Recession, a lot of districts on the east side, they cut days. And it's hard for our staff to even get a grapple on is cut days means a reduction in pay, not a freeze, but it means less contract days. And it was a very collaborative process where we bargained in the same room with the teachers and the classified and cut 15 days out of everybody's contract, superintendent, everybody. And so we felt the pain for at least a couple of years. We were able to rebound quicker than a lot of districts, but it was what happened here, though, contrary to that, is the district relied on the reserves and cut staff. And so there wasn't that hole to coming out of the recession, or as big a hole. So I mentioned an outlook going forward earlier. This is kind of a 3-year trend look, and I mentioned the beginning fund balance of just under 35 million at the beginning of this year, and going into next year, you look at the bar part of the graph. The red is the operating expenditures, light blue the operating revenue. You see in both years going forward, the assumption for 23-24 is a $9.6 billion increase in the state school fund, or a 3% increase. But you can see that the revenue number is basically the same. And that's because you're going from 51% of the total in 22-23 to 49% of the total in 23-24. But yet costs are still going up, and the numbers are actually, the $7.5 million drawdown of reserves in 22-23 basically doubles in 23-24 to $14.5 million drawdown, and drawing down the fund balance to $7 million, which is maybe 5% of your operating revenues. And then the trend lines at the bottom are just comparing the green line's the ending fund balance, the red line's the required amount per policy. And you can see where for 22, 23, they're at, they're crossing at the same level, but the green line is dropping below the red line in 23, 24.
Before you move on from this slide, I've asked versions of this question before, but I struggle to wrap my mind around it a little bit. I guess at what point do we begin talking about attrition, talking about not hiring, talking about making cuts in the budget, that the trend line doesn't look great. So how much time do we have until we have to start having this kind of conversation?
Yeah, I think part of that is we'll start, this spring or in the fall when we have new labor contracts in place, and likely early in the fall, we'll have the discussions we can have based on the information we have at the time. The governor will develop a budget and propose that around December 1st for the next biennium. And then the legislature convenes in February 1-ish. And so there'll be, there's already some advocacy going on at the K-12 community level related to this concept of, is there going to be an increase? What's the current service level? What's the amount needed going forward to maintain what we're doing now?
But basically, we could be one biennium away, depending on legislative action.
Yeah.
From a cut standpoint.
So next steps, before I get into the details of next steps, I want to make sure all of you and the viewing public is reminded of this, the importance of this process. Because in a lot of ways, it feels former like a board meeting, but it's a lot different than a board meeting. You have appointed members that are part of the body here, in addition to the board members. And I think there's a statute, there's an area of Oregon statute 294 that it's called local budget law. And it covers this whole public process plus the contents of a public agency budget. And we don't have the flexibility a lot of times that we have with a board meeting if we have to make a shift. We had to schedule this meeting and post it between 5 and 25 days of this date. And so there was a lot of non-commitment to the meeting. And I said, we can't do that. We need a quorum. We need to get this budget approved. And because there wasn't time to make a shift. And only have, once this budget is approved, we only have so many days to get the summary of the budget posted in the news. Everything is done old school with the local budget law, published in the newspaper. You can do online, but you got to do at least one posting notice in the newspaper. And that's the same with the approved budget, announcing the public hearing where the board adopts at the end of June. We have to publish a summary of the budget. Has to be, I don't remember the exact calendar of days. It's not the full 5 to 25. It's a more condensed calendar, but local budget law is intended to be a very public process. We have people here for public comment tonight, which is great. It's been a few years since we've had public comment at the budget meeting. And so your first role is to listen to the public comment. And then once that takes place, you deliberate on the budget, have any discussion amongst yourself, ask clarifying questions. And then if you have the information you have tonight and you need tonight, you consider approval of the budget in total. Plus your other role besides approval of the budget is to approve the tax rates So we have a tax rate for our local option, $1 per $1,000 of assessed value. The budget committee is responsible for approving that or considering it. And then we have a what's called a permanent levy rate that comes out of the property tax reform law of the 1990s. And so we have the same rate that gets applied to the assessed value in our district, and the dollars that are generated from that offset the money in the state school fund that comes from the state. So each dollar from the permanent rate levy that we receive from the county, we receive one less dollar from the state. That makes up that. That's all part of the $138 million state school fund piece. And then, so that's your role tonight. Consider, listen to the public comment, consider approval of the budget and approval of the tax rate. I didn't mention the levy part because we also have to have you approve the $23 million plus that will be assessed to pay our borrowing cost, our debt service costs. And then going forward, the school board will also hold a public hearing on June 27th. And again, take comment on the approved budget. Tonight, the comments on the available comment times for the proposed budget. And then hopefully the board adopts the budget on June 27th. If we don't, we're in trouble because got to have a budget on July 1, got to submit all of this information by July 15th to the assessor's office. I like to give that, especially we have new budget committee members, new board members, to give that little 101 on local budget law. Before I close, I want to just remind everyone of kind of our philosophy and practice here in Tigard-Tualatin. We truly appreciate Jimmy mentioning the community processes, and we truly express our values by what we include in our budget and how we prioritize and spend our dollars. And appreciate all of you for your public service and being part of this process. And in addition, the community process was mentioned earlier. Now that was our community advisory committee, which is supporting the development of the new strategic plan for the board. And so we had one session with that group that helped with the prioritization of the $2 million that we have to invest for next year. And so I appreciate all the folks that were part of that process, and also cabinet for being planful and thoughtful and coming up with the priorities for the new investments, and also our administrators for weighing in on that prioritization. And I know I'm probably forgetting people, but there was a slew. It was a whole team effort for sure. It wasn't just the finance team. In addition, Dr. Sue for her leadership in the budget development process. Sarah and I, we enjoyed our weekly meetings to strategize and talk about what we need to focus on. And also two of my colleagues from the business office over here, Sarah is our controller. She's responsible for making sure the budget balances and that we're taking into account all the input from the various stakeholder groups, including the budget. Tara is new to her position. She's our executive assistant. She's organized all the logistics of the meeting with Patty's support, who's coming to the meeting on an off evening for her, even though she was here on Monday for the board meeting. And so I just wanted to share that gratitude. And with that, this portion is closed, I think.
Thanks, Director Moore. Okay, I think we're going to move on to public comment. So requests to make public comment were emailed to TTSD Business Office at ttsd.k12.or.us. Requests were accepted until 4 p.m. today. They will be able to join the meeting during the public comments portion. We have a couple here on their way. And I'm actually going to pause reading until we have our public comments. All right, there he is. Members of the public are limited to 3 minutes and should be brief and concise. Speakers may offer objective criticism of the district operations or programs, but the budget committee will not hear complaints concerning specific district personnel. After being recognized by the budget committee chair, please sit up here at the presenters table and identify yourself with your full name and community or zip code and state topic that you want to comment on. So I'm going to read we've got 2 names tonight. I'm going to read the first name and then the second name, and then we'll invite the first one to come up. So the first one's going to be Benjamin Pierce, and second we'll have Kim Matzler. So Benjamin, are you ready? Awesome. Logistically, I've got a little timer on my phone. And so I'm going to set it for 2 minutes, and you're going to hear a duck quack at the end of the 2 minutes that will indicate to you that you have 1 more minute, and then you'll hear another duck quack.
Okay.
Does that sound good? Is that green light on that microphone?
Yep.
Awesome. You want to bring that mic, you can drag it close to your mouth so we can hear you. Whenever you're ready, buddy.
I'm ready.
Right. Can you hit the button on there for us? There you go.
My name is Benjamin Pierce, and I'm here to present why Mary Woodward should have STEM classes daily. Some kids excel at school. Some kids do not. Either way, all of us kids need to have some more education. STEM is perfect for that, as in it has art, math, technology, and engineering. STEM is great for kids who want to have fun and learn at the same time. Most kids in 4th through 5th want STEM. I have on record a total amount of of 96 kids in 4th grade who want STEM back. This is a rough estimate, as I could not get to see everybody if they wanted it or not. For most kids, once they returned to 4th grade, they were sad that they didn't have STEM anymore. I have empathy for them because most kids in this school are sad because we can't have STEM. In STEM, you can learn about stuff you don't usually learn in your classroom, including coding, science, art, and engineering. According to Britannica.com, our knowledge-based economy is driven by constant innovation. The foundation of innovation lies in a dynamic, motivated, and well-educated workforce equipped with STEM skills. If kids aren't prepared for the world, they will not have a good time in life. Also, according to ed.gov, in an ever-changing, increasingly complex world, it's more important than ever that our nation's youth are prepared to bring knowledge and skills to solve problems, make sense of information, and know how to gather and evaluate evidence to make decisions. These are the kinds of skills that students need to develop in science, technology, engineering, and math, including computer science disciplines collectively known as STEM/CS. If we want a nation where our future leaders, neighbors, and workers can understand and solve some of the complex challenges of today and tomorrow, and to meet the demands of the dynamic and evolving workforce, building a student's skills, content, and knowledge and literacy in STEM fields is essential. We must also make sure that no matter where children live, that they have access to quality learning environments. If STEM comes back, kids will get smarter faster. STEM prepares us for the world and teaches us life skills. I'm doing this for every kid who wants STEM back in our career. Please bring back STEM funding for STEM education. Thank you.
Excellent job. Kim Matzler.
All right, a lot of the things I'm going to say seem like very common sense ideas, which actually should have all been in place years ago. The pandemic definitely highlighted the need for what I'm going to talk about, but we needed these services years ago, and will continue to need them. It seems that we are in a bit of a crisis, and if you think that's dramatic and that we aren't, why wait until we are actually in a crisis? I've reached out to parents across TTSD and got a lot of feedback about the gaps they are seeing. The first thing I'd like to address is IEPs. I had so many parents let me know that they felt all alone and that they had to do their own research, advocating and attending meetings themselves. I've heard rumors of an IE specialist at the district level, but most parents that I spoke with hadn't heard of that person. It seems silly to have multiple parents doing the research instead of having a district person, or ideally one person per school who can help families navigate the system. Most of the parents I spoke with were able to afford outside help or had time to do all the research and advocate for an IEP. So I can't even imagine how many kiddos in need are not getting the help because their parents are unable to spend the time and or money doing so. I've heard that many parents were told dyslexia wasn't a real thing, or that once it was diagnosed, the reading supports weren't appropriate. So parents are paying thousands of dollars for out-of-pocket, out-of-district support. I actually had a friend who went through TTSD in her 30s and she was not diagnosed. And so she went through school thinking she was dumb. She went through school acting out. So how many of our kiddos are acting out, not because of behavioral issues, but because they're not properly diagnosed and they go through thinking that they're stupid. I've heard many kiddos being told that they don't qualify for an IEP unless they are performing several grade levels below. So let's help with 504. Let's get these families connected. Service families and some staff I spoke with want a full-time school psychologist down the hall. They want occupational therapists down the hall, which leads to my main passion, my hill that I will die on, is mental health services. It blows my mind that there are not any, at least at my kids' schools. There are no therapists. There are no social workers. There are counselors and staff who work with the kiddos, but it is not enough. There are not enough staff able to attend to all the needs that are coming up. Much of the time is spent on the kids who are acting out, and all the kids in the middle are ignored. There are plenty of kiddos who don't act out. They do go to class. They're following all the rules, and they're suffering silently. Depression, anxiety, fear of getting slammed into lockers day after day, self-harm, suicidal ideation. There should be groups. There should be social skills groups, grief, anger, depression, wellness promotion. How do you take care of yourself? A social worker to assess self-harm and suicidal ideation. There should be social workers running conflict mediation groups and hopefully teaching the kiddos these skills so that they can in turn run some of these groups for the younger kiddos. Social workers and therapists should be located at each school, more than one. They are able to have one-on-one weekly sessions. They are able to do home visits. They are able to hold family sessions. They can assess whether short-term therapy will address the issues or if a kiddo needs longer-term care. We should not be referring out as a first resort. We lose a lot of families. Therapists have long waiting lists. Families can't pay. They can't take time off work in the middle of the day, or their child is missing several hours of school each week to make midday appointments. Our children need comprehensive mental health services in school. They are in school so many hours a day, so many months a year. I don't think teachers should be doing the therapy. Let's let teachers get back to teaching and bring in more mental health services. Teachers and staff are pulled in so many directions in a day. We are expecting too much from them. And most of them are not even doing their actual job description. They are running around from crisis to crisis, putting Band-Aids on. I've actually been looking at friends for my upcoming high school reunion. I'm not going to say which one, but they have some of my friends, when I bring up certain names or high school, they are still traumatized by how they were treated. They were affected by, classmates who tormented them physically and emotionally. So that is happening. I hear about that at all the PSO meetings I'm going to. We can't protect our kiddos from everything, but we are doing a terrible job at protecting them from much right now. The feedback from a recent survey at Fowler Middle School was heartbreaking. A lot of the kids just want to learn, but there are so many distractions, disrespect to teachers, kids feeling unsafe, kids asking other kids that are not behaving to behave and then getting picked on for it or beat up. There are kids who just wander the hallways all day. I don't want the principal or a teacher to be managing that. We need full-time staff to make sure kids are where they need to be. And if they aren't, we need more creative consequences. We need clear direction on what can and cannot be done, and we need follow through. I do not blame the school staff. There is not enough time in the day to address all that seems to be happening on a daily basis in our schools. The result is there do not seem to be real consequences or change. And I've had a few families tell me that the staff told them they could not promise that their child could be kept safe. They should change schools. Students are feeling like there are no real consequences. Kids and parents are feeling discouraged. They don't want to keep reporting things that happen because they aren't feeling heard. Staff barely has enough time some days to deal with the high level behaviors, which are really impacting a lot of the kids. And the simmering stuff is getting ignored. I get it. I used to be a school social worker and there's never enough money for all the preventative stuff. But why can't we change that? Why wait until something is a crisis to address it? Why allow these kiddos who obviously need our help to go on to the next grade without addressing their mental health and academic needs? We are graduating them to high school and then out into our community. Why wouldn't we want the kiddos to be as productive and healthy as they can be? Why are we failing them when we know there is so much more we are capable of doing if we had the right services in place and more adults to help? There should be mental health services readily available under the TTSD umbrella. We should aim for dedicated therapists, social workers in each school so relationship can be developed, not half-day splits with multiple schools. Let's partner with PSU and develop an internship program. Let's partner with NAMI and use their resources. Let's be proactive and help our kids who've lost so much over these past few years. The feedback I got from all these parents was how much they loved their teachers. Can you imagine how much more love there would be if they could work collaboratively with therapists and social workers so the teachers can focus on doing their job? Why can't there be a multidisciplinary team of service providers in each school? Why can't we provide the services we know many of our kids so desperately need? Why are we ignoring all of these simmering issues in schools until they become a crisis? Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. A little over the 3 minutes. Okay, and we will certainly take your comments into consideration as we move to the budget committee deliberations. So now is the time for the budget committee to discuss the budget. Maybe if you're online and you have a comment or a question, you can raise your hand. That seems to work well, and your name popped up nice and big on the screen. Or raise your hand. Got a question or you want to discuss? And then we'll manage through this, and then we'll move on to the motion to get there. Ms. Jessica, first up.
Thank you. I was just going to ask Dr. Sue if she could address the questions or issues brought up in the public testimony about how do we figure out the staffing and when in the process is that sort of thing addressed?
Specific staffing or staffing relative to social, emotional, and mental health. I think as you.
Well, that and the STEM, I guess. I was
And then
curious
STEM,
about that.
yeah, thank you. The STEM class that Benjamin so eloquently gave testimony to was an extracurricular class that was developed to provide an additional prep for teachers at elementary. During the SIA process, and because we were also in process moving towards a new science curriculum K-5 known as TWIG, now as TWIG, there was a decision made to provide a different avenue versus the STEM class. The STEM class was actually allocated based on the number of students, and they got a percentage of FTE to cover that particular period to provide additional prep for teachers. And so the decision at the curricular level was made that we could provide an additional prep in another way and wrap STEM into, and that was part of the consideration for the TWIG science curriculum. I know what Benjamin is describing. They had a marvelous teacher at Mary Woodward. I had the opportunity to observe her on multiple occasions. Highly engaging activities for students, and provided them with the opportunity for critical thinking and problem solving. And that is the thrust of the professional development that our teachers will be receiving at the elementary level relative to the implementation of TWIG as we go into the next school year. This year, TWIG was paused, for a period of time because teachers were reporting through our association that they were completely and totally overwhelmed based on the number of needs, emotional needs that our students needed, and so needed to rethink the way in which professional development was delivered this year. And that will be certainly picked up going into next year. Relative to our second presenter this evening, the Massler, there is an extensive network through the PBIS system that we have, again, that tiered system that I was speaking to. This is the reason why we are investing in the mental health within the health teachers to teach specifically in a new curriculum that will be presented to the board for adoption in June, has an extensive section relative to social emotional learning. And this is the reason why we want to be very specific and targeted relative to mental health teachers. Specific to the social worker, we continue to build that out. And as you look at our SIA budget and our priorities, and Jenny, I know you were part of that process, there was a concerted effort to provide mental health, continued expansion of mental health services, which actually stood us in good stead during the first year of the pandemic when we were totally on CDL. Those investments were large in terms of providing a beginning network of mental health services. Absolutely, everyone understands that the need for mental health in general, not just in schools, but certainly in our communities and across our state, continues to be under-resourced. There just are not enough therapists in the pipeline. And it's something that we are continually working on. I had the privilege of serving on the Oregon Educators Benefit Board at the state level. It is a conversation that we are having with OHA relative to what are the avenues in which we can continue to encourage therapists into the field to meet the ever-growing need. Certainly in my previous service as the superintendent in Springfield, and we were sitting right on the heels of the University of Oregon. As soon as clinical psychologists were available, we would snap them up, and still we would have large caseloads. We just cannot. There aren't enough individuals, but that does not mean we have taken our eye off the ball. There is also a reboot relative to middle school principal equalization. Their focus will be primarily this PBIS SEL system. So multiple layers of staffing to address this and build out more clearly and more fully a system of supports. First and foremost, to keep kids as regulated as possible, keep them out of the tier 2 and the tier 3 services, but still have a system that addresses tier 2 and tier 3. And Ms. Massler, I will certainly have our Director Kinch, who is Director of Student Services, relative to your IEP concerns, address those issues for you, as well as Director Fields, who serves at secondary level, middle and secondary, to speak to the issues that you have raised this evening relative to our middle schools, because there is a plan that it has been developed between now and the end of the year to address the immediate needs as well as going into the next school year. I'm hopeful that answered your question, Jessica, or there are other pieces that I can
It
share.
did. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that there's nothing that we're not shaping or discussing anything related to that sort of staffing at this juncture that is decided in a different separate process.
Correct. In essence, the priorities that we brought forward to you in this budget address many of those concerns. Not all of them by any stretch. It is an incremental process that we are going to continue to work towards. And it is certainly something in terms of our advocacy as we go into the biennial conversation with the legislature, that we are currently relying on those ESSER dollars as they were meant to be focused to the immediate needs of students, but those needs go well beyond the 2 to 4 years that those dollars are available to us. And there needs to be concerted conversation both at a state and a federal level to continue that funding to help us with students who will be making up those gains over the course of many years.
Thank you, Dr. Ricky Smith, for that information. I also wanted to thank the public commenters, and I think some follow-up would be good from the district. First of all, Benjamin, excellent job. And when the time is right, we can just cross out my last name and we'll get you up here because you were very eloquent and well-spoken, and you raised some great points, and I'm hopeful that we can help achieve what you're describing. And Ms. Massler, I agree with what your underlying concerns are about mental health. I've been thinking about that, as I think we all probably have the last couple of days, especially. And I agree with Dr. Ricky Smith. There's more work for us to do. We did exponentially expand our capacity to provide mental health services with the SIA dollars a couple of years ago. But as we've seen the pandemic, the need has risen much more quickly than the capacity has. So I agree. I think that's going to be something that hopefully the community can advocate together for, to get dedicated resources from the state so we can make those investments, and in the workforce development component. Because I think we got a presentation, this might have been a year ago. I think it was Kathy Wilson-Fay, who's their mental health coordinator, about
That was this fall.
we're shifting, we can't find the individuals, so we're shifting our model of service because we can't hire. We're trying to go through a third party, essentially. I don't know if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yes, we're using Life Source, and we are using our currently our partners, Virginia Garcia Clinic, as well as Neighborhood Health Systems, to help expand access to ongoing support, ongoing clinical therapy. But also additionally to that, I also want to address the concern relative to connecting families. Also with the SIA dollars, we have family partnership advocate, FPAs, in every single one of our schools that are both culturally and linguistically also trained, so that they can connect with any member of our school that walks into any member of our communities, our school's community, that walks through the doors, and they connect them not just to current services such as, I have to think through the list here: food services, housing services, healthcare services, and they act as that go-between the school and the parents and the community. And that is an active network that has been built out because of the SIA dollars. So there were over 16 individuals that were invested in for that service as well. Again, building that service, and had we not had that in the SIA original budget, again, we would have been far more hamstringed than we were during the first year of the pandemic. They connected families to food resources. They connected them to hotspots for their children's computer online learning, and a variety of sources, and they continue to provide those services now. So I think that there are, again, beginning a very strong system, but certainly more room for us, and this committee will see us bring back in future budgets continued requests to strengthen that and expand that system.
So just a couple more notes. I would definitely invite anyone interested to participate in our strategic planning committee. I think we've got a couple more coming up, and in the future, involved in roles like this on the budget committee. We need voices from the community who have lived experiences in our district and have ideas for how we can improve. So I think consider this an invitation to apply and try to get involved in district work. And then just a quick note on, obviously, when you've got a budget of this size, there's a lot going on, right? But I've served on the financial oversight committee for the last 3 years in TTSD, and at each financial oversight committee meeting, there are moments in the committee where we ask first the superintendent to leave the room, and then our CFO and staff to leave the room. And the committee is comprised of people who have professional level expertise in finance, accounting, etc. And we also hear from our district auditors at those times. And in every single meeting we hear very high marks from our auditors and from our committee members about the work of our district leadership team. And our auditors have said on multiple occasions that we set the standard in TTSD. So that's something I'm very proud of, and just wanted to recognize that component that happens in the financial oversight committee meeting. So I have confidence in this budget. There are certainly some areas that make me concerned in the long run, but I think we're all going to need to work on together. But I appreciate the work that went into it. I think this is a strong starting place for our district.
I just want to echo, and then I'll come to you, Jenny. I want to echo what Chair Ben said about the strategic planning process and being involved in that. I've been involved in that myself. I come to the meetings of 100, 150, 200 people. And the stuff that comes to us this evening is a result of that. I mean, we see, I'm filling out things, I'm seeing the investments, everyone's participating in that ranking. So it is an opportunity to actually have influence. Jimmy.
Thank you, Gordon. I just want to echo the work that I have seen, a community-centered budget approach, how that actualizes itself in the past year plus. I'm sitting here right now looking at a document. It's entitled Investment for Sale. And it's something that David put together along with staff. And that particular approach gives us an opportunity to put our money where we would like to have it as it relates to the type of district model that we want here in Tigard. And when we talk about instructional coaches and health teachers and social workers and custodians, that tells me that we are in fact really working to build a budget that fits the needs of the community, fits the needs of students, fits the needs of staff and administrators at large. I think that as I listen to both the comments made from the public, one, there is a role that state legislatures play in providing the necessary funding at the local level. Yes, we are going to have a budget of 360 some odd $million, but the need to connect with our legislative body and have them move toward providing the necessary funding that we need beyond just what our budget is requesting. It is clearly an important task for our community members. And I certainly, for those folks who may be watching tonight's presentation, I would say, as we move toward our November elections, the questions that need to be asked, amongst other things, of our legislators, those seeking legislative office, is how do you plan to address the kinds of things that we need at the local level? How do you plan on addressing the issues of mental health services? Because it is not only a school-based issue, it is an issue that impacts every organization inside of the state of Oregon. I currently sit on the Public Safety Advisory Board for the city of Tigard and the police department. And we are talking about the need for mental health services through our local law enforcement perspective. And so not only is this something that needs to be looked at from the educational community, but also throughout our services model.
Thank you, Jimmy. Are there any other questions online? Discussion? Okay, well, if there's no other discussion, I would welcome a motion to approve the budget.
I move that the Budget Committee of the Tigard-Tualatin School District 23J, Washington and Clackamas Counties, Oregon, hereby approve as proposed the budget for the 2022-2023 fiscal year in the sum of $361,266,958 for all funds now on file at the Tigard Administration Office. I further move that the Budget Committee of the Tigard-Tualatin School District 23J, Washington and Clackamas Counties, Oregon, approve the taxes provided for in the proposed budget at the rate of $4.9892 per $1,000 of assessed value for operations, in the amount of $1 per $1,000 of assessed value for local option tax for general school operations, and in the amount of $23,537,800 for general obligation bonds.
Thank you for the motion, Chair Bowman. Do we have a second?
Second.
Jimmy seconded, and we're going to go for a roll call vote. Jimmy Brown.
Aye.
Jessica Peltz.
Aye.
Megan Madlam.
Aye.
Octavio Gonzalez.
Aye.
Chair Bowman.
Aye.
Director Gerschmied.
Aye.
Director Irvin.
Aye.
Director Lynn.
Aye.
And Director Hymas. Director Hymas, do we still have you on the line? On voting. Okay, the motion passes. I believe that brings an end to the agenda. So